Cumberland traffic, airplane 4041 uniform, departing 11, glider and
Matter of fact, the whole thing was looking really good. He was doing the right thing, going straight ahead. He had a nice paddock off to the left. I was pretty comfortable. And then he said, I'm 500 feet, I'll turn back. So I thought to myself, well, we'll have words about this. But in the meantime, I looked over my shoulder to see where the airstrip was, and the next thing I was upside down. The guy flick-rolled it, inverted, and we were actually only 300 feet above the ground. He looked at the altimeter and said 500 feet. So we went into the trees.
This is Soaring the Sky, a glider pilot's podcast, coming to you from the Mid-Atlantic region here in the United States and bringing you great soaring content from glider pilots all over the globe. We now join Chuck and our guest pilot.
Thank you for joining us for another incredible soaring journey here on the podcast. The island of Tasmania can be found south of Australia, separated by a 240-kilometer stretch of water called the Bass Strait. Now, we know Australia has many soaring clubs throughout the country, and we, of course, have spoke to some of those pilots here on the podcast. But I was curious if Tasmania had any active soaring clubs. We found one. In fact, it's the only one on the island. And there we found our new friend and fellow aviator, Robert Kennedy. Robert got the aviation bug from his father, who was a World War II pilot. As a young boy, he enjoyed flying RC aircraft, but later he discovered sailplanes. Robert has been soaring for nearly 50 years. He started his gliding training flying the K-13, then later the Libelle. He said he also did lots of towing because, hey, tow pilots fly for free. Robert has enjoyed many different types of aviation jobs throughout his life. He spent 10 years of it as an air traffic controller. Working in the morning allowed for flying time in the afternoon. He spent some of his time as a civil aviation inspector, ran a helicopter school, and has flown everything from light sport aircraft, warbirds, to 737s, and many more. He has so many stories to share with us, and you heard a sample of those on the intro, but wait till you hear the rest of his stories.
Not many people know where Tasmania is, but if you look at the map, it's a small island to the far south of the main continent, often left off global maps.
Yeah.
And we were pretty much a grassroots small club. We're right in the middle of the island, but it's not too far in any direction to the water. And so we're very limited by size. We're in the Southern Ocean, so we have regular passing fronts almost daily. We've got limitations of terrain. Much of Tasmania is pretty rugged and uninhabited.
Oh, wow.
We fly in a valley about midway between the main towns of Launceston and Hobart. We fly off a grass strip, and we're pretty basic. We're what you might call, grassroots flying. It's not really possible to do much cross-country here. So
Okay.
It tends to be basically a local soaring club.
Okay.
It's got a long history. The club's been around for 40 plus years. Has had various periods of activity and lack of activity. I've only been associated with the club for about 3 years. I moved to this area and found that there was a gliding club 20 minutes down the road, so I thought, well, I better go and have a look, and one thing another, I've got involved. So the weather here is probably our biggest challenge because, as I said, we have really nice days. Last week I had the Vario off the clock. I looked at my averager the other day and I got average 860 foot per minute.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Climbing to 7,000 feet above sea level, which is about 6,000 above ground level. So there are some really nice days, but what we can do with those days is limited very much by terrain, airspace, and other factors. We can squeeze in maybe 200 triangle or a rectangle or cat's cradle or something like that. But
Okay.
because of the variable weather, the inconsistency of weather, and a whole bunch of other factors, there's not much cross-country here. So we're really a basic flying outfit, and a lot of our members, or some of our members, will tend to go to the mainland of Australia to get good soaring. I've done that myself. I share in a Glasflugel mosquito, and last year I went across to New South Wales, and there you've got open country. You can do 1,000 k's if you want to, good thermals for 10,000 feet and that sort of thing. So if we want to get some good soaring, we pretty much have to go to the mainland.
What does it take to go to the mainland? Yeah.
Now that is a problem because there's a body of water called the Bass Strait between us and the mainland, and the only way you're getting across there is on a ship, a ferry, and it costs me to take my glider over about $1,100 Australian, about 800 US each way.
Wow. Yeah,
So it's not really a very. I had to take it over last year for maintenance. Lacking maintenance facilities here in the state as well, unfortunately. So when you've got any major maintenance, I've got to take it across. So I took the opportunity of going flying on the mainland there. So, we're a small club, but, and of course a small population as well. Our whole state here probably has only about, I think, about 500,000 spread over a fairly wide area.
Yeah.
So we're not near a very big population source, and we're the only club in the state. So we do what we can as best we can with about 35 members, I guess, around about 7 or 8 aircraft, a Pawnee. We've had some difficulties in recent years. The club used to operate about 10 k's away on a farmer's field. Had good support from the owner, but the owners now have got a bit old, and the young fellas have taken over and decided they want to farm the land. So in 2018, the club was told we had to move, and so had to find another airstrip and relocate a hangar from scratch, pull it to pieces, put it up again, establish a strip. And a lot of work, of course, suffered in membership over that period of time. And then, of course, having moved, we had COVID, and that set us back a bit. And we had some tug engine problems, which also set us back financially. But we're in a recovery mode now. We've re-established, got 2 hangars, and things are going pretty well at the moment.
Man, you literally had to pick up everything and move.
Pick up everything and start again, which is pretty tough, with voluntary organisation. You've got lots of stuff to do. Most of this is before my time. I've only been with the club about 3 years. My background is next year I'll be my 50th year since I started flying. I started back in 1974 in Queensland. And my father was a World War II, what they call general duties pilot, light models, small twins, liaison, air sea rescue, air ambulance, that sort of flying. So I had a background in flying from a young person, model aeroplanes, that sort of thing. But when I went to school, my father said, well, don't be a pilot. You're doing well at school, go to university. So I did engineering. But I always wanted to fly, and eventually one day I went to the gliding club, and that's history now. I've been doing it now for close to 50 years. That club was up in Queensland, still a very big and viable club, and in those days, in the 70s, very, very, very active. I did most of my gliding in those days. I got a power pilot's license to fly the tug, and was an instructor. I've done Gold Sea and diamond height and distance and all that sort of stuff. Most of my flying has been part-time. I ended up as a professional pilot, but started gliding. I found out that the tug pilot didn't have to pay.
Right.
That's for me.
Yeah.
and so I managed to, by various means, because I had no money, get a what we call in those days a restricted pilot license. That is, I had local flying privileges only, no navigation, but that was enough to fly the tug. And at 35 hours in my logbook, I was towing gliders.
Now, what did you start out flying?
I started out on Satabria, 8 GCBC, 150 horsepower flapped Satabria two-seater, and then the club also had a 150 horsepower Pawnee. And I'm back flying the Pawnee again. So I started in 1974, and after nearly 50 years, I'm back to where I started from, flying Pawnee and gliding. So it's an interesting sort of circle, if you like.
What did you spend most of your time in the glider? What type of glider?
Well, in those days, in the 70s, the glass aircraft were really just coming in. So things like the Libelle 201B, standard Libelle, standard Cirrus, and of course, learned to fly on a K-13. In the States, I don't know how many of these gliders are common, but they're very common in Europe and Australia. So an ASK-13 was the standard training, a fabric steel tube, wooden spar type of glider. Still flying today in many places. So most of my flying, probably all my flying, is done on standard class, including diamond, gold, that sort of thing, diamond distance. But in that area, the conditions are pretty good. You can do long distances in lots of Australia. Lots of Australia is very open with very good gliding conditions. A lot of people come to Australia just for the gliding. Unfortunately, where we are is not quite so good, but the rest of Australia is very good.
What's the terrain there in Tasmania? Is it just you have some hills?
Well, we're in a valley, and to the west of us, I've got a plateau of unlandable territory, hills, lakes, timber, all that sort of thing, and to the east of us, similar. So we're in a bit of a valley, and in the valley itself, it's very much agricultural, typically with circular irrigation apparatus, which means landing straight ahead is not very useful. Lots of small paddocks, lots of undulating stuff. So what I've done recently is I've managed to locate as many possible agricultural strips, private strips, and those sorts of things, so that if we do have to outland, we can avoid having to pick select a paddock from the air, which can be unreliable, difficult, poor surface, things like that. Whereas, of course, as I said, if I go to the mainland, quite the opposite. You find that you go in large areas of very big open square paddocks. You can land a 747 in some of those paddocks, but down where we are, it's a little more challenging, and you have to be much more careful.
Have you had some land outs?
Down here, I haven't. In my previous experience, yes, I've done quite a few outlandings in Queensland, New South Wales, and places like that.
Interesting wildlife, of course, in Australia, but also Tasmania. They have some very unique wildlife not found anywhere else in the world. Is that right?
There is. You might have heard, you see in cartoons, American cartoons, of the Tasmanian devil.
Right.
It's not quite as what it looks like in the cartoons, but they're quite interesting down here. And of course, in the rest of Australia, the usual thing, kangaroos are very common. Common down here too. Driving is a hazard because these animals hop out in front of you, and so you've always got to be careful. Tasmania is it's got an English kind of climate. It's a fair way south as UK is north, but it gets cool in the winter. But we do fly 365 days a year, so even though the weather conditions may not be very good soaring conditions, we tend to train and fly all year round.
But some good training days, right? Do you do a lot of that?
Yeah, that's right. We're pretty much in a local or training club, and that's what we do most. We're very short, though, of experienced people. I think that worldwide, the gliding fraternity suffers from a lack of new blood. We are starting to get some younger people in, but our instructors and tug pilots tend to be at the older end of the spectrum, and it seems difficult to encourage new people to start to get interested. There's too many other things out there to attract their attention, perhaps.
Yeah.
We do have a few younger people coming along now, so I'm hopeful that we can generate a new cadre of people who will take over from the older members and become instructors and tug pilots and continue the work. Some of us are approaching our use-by date. I don't know if you have
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I understand. Yeah.
you go
Yeah.
to the
I hear
supermarket, you got a label there saying, best
you. Yeah.
before. Yeah.
Wings and Wheels has been serving the soaring and sport aviation community for over 30 years. They hands down have the largest and most comprehensive inventory of sailplane and soaring supplies in North America, and they ship globally. Nearly everything you'll find on their site is in stock and ready for same-day shipping. Wings and Wheels is the exclusive American representative for HPH sailplanes. Be sure to check out the Twin Shark, their latest launch. They're also now the exclusive distributor in North America for the new Just Soaring Glider Sim Pro. The team has thousands of hours of flying experience in gliders and airplanes. Staffed by Adam, Kelly, Laura, and Sean. A friendly voice will answer when you call or email them. Check them out at wingsandwheels.com. So, Bob, you've done a lot of soaring, obviously, over the years.
Well, yes and no. I've done a fair bit of soaring. I've done a lot of flying. One thing led to another, and although I started out just gliding, having got a powered pilot's license and flying the tug, at the time I was a civil engineer, and I used to go to what you would call the outback on various projects, difficult to get to. So I thought, well, if I did my navigation training, I could fly myself, and I did that for quite a few years. So I got quite a lot of experience flying around as a private pilot to construction projects in the outback. The other thing that I did is that bit by bit, I did things like a commercial license, and a powered instructor rating, all of that done weekends and part-time with no real prospect of entering the industry. I just did it for personal reasons. And at the time, I had a wife and 3 children, mortgage, and all those sort of things. So going into flying as a profession was just not viable financially. But so I did a stint of about 10 years as an air traffic controller. And throughout that period, I kept flying part-time. So I'd be working in the tower in the morning and flying in the afternoon. So after quite a few years, I did actually go into full-time commercial flying after that. And my first full-time job as a commercial pilot was manager and chief instructor.
Oh, wow.
All of the other ratings, all up the food chain, had been done part-time. I've basically never done a full-time training course of any flying course in my whole career. It's always been part-time weekends and graft and corruption, or ways and means of getting flying. But so eventually I did. I left air traffic, and I was actually running a helicopter school for quite some years. Well, the biggest helicopter school in the Southern Hemisphere, it turned out to be.
Oh, wow.
I had a very bad crash, though. After that helicopter school, there was a helicopter school which did both fixed-wing training, helicopter training. You started out with a private pilot license on a Cessna 172 and then converted to a helicopter. It was a cheaper way to achieve a commercial helicopter pilot's license. So I was running the school and doubling up as the chief instructor for the fixed-wing side. But after that, a friend and colleague of mine and I joined forces, and we ran a small flying school for some years, did a lot of flying training. But in November of '99, I was doing a check ride. I was what you would call a designated pilot examiner. Is that what you call them in the States?
Yep, that's right.
Approved test officer here in Australia. and I was doing a private pilot's testing on an RV6, and we landed at a very remote, well, it wasn't even an airstrip, a remote, what we would call a paddock field in your language, which I knew of. And I used to do this because I'd like to see a private pilot being able to land, if you like, off field. I felt that a private pilot would be invited by his friend to come pig shooting somewhere on a property, and everybody can land at a bitumen sealed airstrip in town, but what happens when they go to the bush and land on something which is unfamiliar? So I took this guy as part of his test to an unprepared field, which I knew, and we talked about the arrival and so forth. And I briefed the guy to do what we would call a short field takeoff, a maximum performance takeoff. And then I also briefed him that after a sufficient height that we will simulate an engine failure. We did a lap and we got to a safe height, and I called for an engine failure. And I didn't know the chap. This was the first time I'd met him. I hadn't trained him. Anyway, he said, "Oh." Matter of fact, the whole thing was looking really good. He was doing the right thing, going straight ahead. He had a nice paddock off to the left. I was pretty comfortable. And then he said, "Oh, I'm 500 feet. I'll turn back." Well, in the role of an examiner, you don't enter into the discussion in the cockpit. You wait till you get back on the ground. And so I thought to myself, well, we'll have words about this. But in the meantime, I looked over my shoulder to see where the airstrip was, and the next thing I was upside down. The guy flick rolled it, inverted, and we were actually only 300 feet above the ground. He looked at the altimeter and said 500, but anyway, I have it on good authority that 300 feet is insufficient height to recover from a spin. So we went into the trees. I managed to get the thing wings level out of the spin, so we weren't rotating, but I was just recovering, but not enough height to recover the dive. So I went into, luckily, not very heavy timber. Had it been an open paddock, we would have been killed outright. But the luck was that I went through not very heavy bush, and the aircraft disintegrated. And what was left of it, including the cockpit, ended up upside down, and we survived, as evidence would suggest. So that set me back a bit. I had some serious injuries, but no real after effects. But at that stage, I decided, well, general aviation, as we call it in Australia, maybe I've had enough of that, and I looked at going into, I was 53 at the time, and I looked at going into something else, commuter airlines and that sort of thing, and eventually ended up with the Civil Aviation Authority, Civil Aviation Safety Authority in Australia, as an inspector. And that was very interesting because at the time, GPS was coming into general use, and particularly the use was I shouldn't say particularly, exclusively in the light aircraft field. So you had your Garmins and the Trimbles and those sorts of panel-mounted GPSs available in light aircraft, and I'd done a lot of training in light aircraft with the early GPS units and the early GPS approaches. So when I joined the Civil Aviation Authority, I was very familiar with this kind of work, and I got into a role where I was responsible for the standards and development of instrument approaches, checking out GPS approaches and all those sorts of things, and worrying about the standards, etc. But about that time, the jet airline fleet were also becoming equipped with GPS, but there was no facilities in terms of regulation and training and otherwise for the 737s, the Airbuses, to utilise what was being utilised in general aviation. And so I ended up having to develop regulations to adapt what we had already drafted for small aircraft into the flight management system type aircraft, 737s and so forth. And of course, that then led to working internationally. I did the same kind of work with ICAO, worked with the FIA a lot. And I joined, around about that time, I joined a new startup company in Seattle called Navarus. And they were designing what now, if I don't know, if you fly powered aeroplanes yourself?
Just when I was younger, not now.
Yeah, well, these days now we have what we call RNP. You might have heard of that, Required Navigation Performance, which
Right.
is a development of basic GPS approaches, quite sophisticated systems which allow you to fly into remote areas. I was developing approaches into the Himalayas and places where the minimum safe altitude was 25,000 feet. So as soon as you descend, you're amongst the hills. Very sophisticated types of GPS-based approaches for the airlines, and I did that all around the world, including the US, China, all through Asia. Of course, along this way, because of air traffic and other things, I didn't really do much gliding over that period. So I got out of the gliding, but did a lot of flying. And it wasn't until recent years that, when I retired, that the opportunity came back to go gliding. So as I said, I've been the full circle. So I started out gliding, towing, and now I'm gliding and towing again. Still keeps me interested. You know, one of the best things really, after all of that experience, I flew everything. I had a US ATP, Australian ATP. I've got a 737 rating. Flying everything from light sport aircraft, gliders, helicopters, warbirds. Used to fly what you call a Texan, what the Brits call a Harvard, Tiger Moths,
Right.
all sorts. But after all of that, I think really gliding is probably the most interesting. I was just looking at the weather forecast for tomorrow, and although we suffer from weather conditions down here in Tasmania, one of the big advantages potentially is that tomorrow we'll have a wave right over the top of the airfield. Are you familiar with the weather program SkySight?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah, the SkySight's developed by an Australian lad, Matthew Scudder from Kingaroy up in Queensland, very
Yep,
bright
correct.
lad, and we use that all the time. So SkySight's now predicting for tomorrow a wave directly over the field. In most, I don't know what it's like where you are, but in most places that I know where there's been wave, you have to go somewhere. You know, when I was at Kingaroy, we had to pick up about the third wave, climb up to about 10,000 feet, then poke into the wind and pick up the next one and the next one before you got to the primary wave and some height. But here we've got a primary wave dead over the top of the airfield. The only problem there, though, is that the airspace limitation here without a transponder is 8,500 feet. And unlike perhaps other parts of the world, our aircraft aren't equipped with transponders. So I'm trying to negotiate a block clearance here with the regulatory authority, but the bureaucracy is making that particularly difficult. But there is potential to go to 20,000 feet directly over our airfield.
So are you going to attempt that?
Oh, I've already attacked it. I haven't succeeded, but I've attacked it. I'm having difficulty because, like many regulatory authorities around the world, and I've worked with a lot of them, they suffer from a lack of expertise. So when you're talking to some of these organisations, it's hard to get the message across because they generally don't understand. And I've got that problem here that their knowledge of systems, capabilities, their lack of modern standards and so forth make it difficult to communicate. So before I can go too far in the future, I'm going to have to try and find out some way of. It's a bit like saying, "Look, I know more than you do."
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and that doesn't go across too well. But it's a fact.
Yeah.
I used to work for them, and I know. A lot of organisations, particularly in Asia, really struggle to find expert people these days. Anybody with some current good knowledge tends to be snapped up to other employers, airlines, and so forth. And if you take many countries, you'll find that the inspectors are retired airline pilots. They get to 60, they have to retire, so they go and get a job with the authority, and they sort of work out their retirement, so to speak, doing an inspector's job, and not necessarily the most innovative or best educated or active sort of people, unfortunately. That's worldwide.
What would you be flying tomorrow?
Yeah, I have a share with a friend in a Glasflugel Mosquito,
Okay.
1977 model. You know the Mosquito? It's a pretty nice aeroplane. It's still a very good aircraft after all these years. You know, it's well equipped, got a good nav system, oxygen, and all that sort of stuff in it. But still, even though it's 40 odd years old, it still performs well. And you can buy those kind of glides. In fact, I noticed around the world that a lot of those older glides become more and more popular. Down here in Australia, they're running competitions for what they call it's like a sports class. So you
Okay.
have a limited form, things like Cirruses, Hornets, Libelles, a whole bunch of those kind of aircrafts. Generally, there's something like the high 30 to 1, 38 to 40 to 1 sort of range of glide angles, typically 15-metre wingspan, and they're becoming now a popular competition class. You know, so there's quite a lot of resurgence and interest in that class of glider.
What's the glide ratio on the Mosquito?
Oh, the book figure is 42 to 1.
Okay, yeah.
You know, and but you know, that would be the best you get. You have to be the right center of gravity and a whole bunch of other things. But you know, it'll probably getting close to that. It certainly flies very nicely. The club has two two-seaters, a single-seater, Pawnee tug, and a couple of other private aircraft. There's another Mini Nimbus, which is very similar in style to the Mosquito there. And we built a new hangar this year, or last year rather. Now this is 2023, so we've got a second hangar, and so we are increasing our fleet bit by bit.
Now, if somebody wanted to come fly Tasmania, what would you suggest them to do?
Well, they're always welcome. We had a chap the other day from Norway, only last weekend. Really nice guy. Yeah, a float plane pilot from Norway. He came up, and actually, despite the impression I might have given you, he did an hour and 20 minutes soaring with good conditions there. So you know, he had a really good flight. Another chap from Austria about a month ago came out and flew with us. The regulations, like many countries, are a bit limiting. Unless you want to go through quite a bit of paperwork to get solo privileges or pilot and command privileges, but generally we just make visitors welcome, and we find a safety pilot to fly with them, and away they go. We treat them as though they're a guest member and charge them the same rates as our other members, so they're always welcome. It's a nice area. I mean, it's a nice countryside. It's quite pretty and scenic and that sort of thing. I don't know. It's not like the Western Desert in the US, flat and open. It's quite scenic. If you get up high enough, you can see the coast both sides.
Oh, wow, nice.
Yes. Right.
What's the distance from both sides?
Oh, look, I'd have to measure it, but I'd say we wouldn't get much more than 100 k's in any direction. Generally, I would think. And of course, a lot of that is not flyable. Yeah, actually, I'm just looking at the map of the state at the moment. Yes, from where we are to the water, 90 k's.
Okay, yeah. Well,
not that far. And the other direction, about 150 kilometres. Yeah, if I drew a 150 kilometre circle, I'd cover most of the state.
Wow, yeah.
But if anybody does want to come down here, they're more than welcome. We'd look after them and make them very welcome.
All right, we'll put the website in the show notes and any other contacts you have that would be helpful.
Yeah, the website, there's plenty of contacts there. There's a few videos on our website. One of our members who looks after the website does a really good job. Quite a good website and quite a few videos there. But unfortunately, we're not going to do any 1,500 kilometre flights or anything outstanding. But we do the best we can with the circumstances. And we're developing slowly, and I'm hoping that we can increase our membership in the next few years. Certainly, we've recovered from a low point a few years ago where we had to move, and the club had lost many members and was pretty small. But now we're sort of pretty healthy and growing again.
Hopefully, a lot more people now will know about Soaring Tasmania.
Well, I hope so. We're really trying to encourage people, but as I said, I don't know why it is. In my day, I couldn't wait to get an aeroplane, but I think there's a lot of competing activities these days. So many different
Yeah,
things that people
unfortunately.
can do, and
Yep.
and so it can be difficult to recruit and retain members, which is unfortunate
Yeah.
because really gliding is a terrific sport, and for those who are willing to get into it and try it out, many of us have been doing virtually for a lifetime and still interested. You see, there's not many things you can do where many years later you still get a thrill out of catching a good thermal or whatever it may be.
Exactly. And experience some things that others will never get to experience.
Yes, then of course there's the perception that glider pilots are somehow or other daredevils, quite wrongly. But on the other hand, having done many thousands of hours of powered flying can be pretty uninteresting in many respects. As long as the engine keeps going, it's not the
Yeah.
greatest challenge. Whereas
Yeah. Yeah.
every day you go gliding, it's up to you to put it all together, not just the flying, but the weather, the meteorology, the performance.
Yeah.
So many facets to gliding that's what makes it interesting.
Absolutely.
Mind you, I always tell people when they join that it's a lot of work for a little bit of flying. In gliding, you've got to warn people that the effort required is a team sport. You've got to help your mates and all the rest of it. So you spend a lot of time pushing, pulling, helping, towing in, towing out, all that sort of stuff. And then occasionally you get to go for a fly. Uh, so it's not like you can rock up to the flying school and pay your money and turn the key and go flying. A lot of effort
Yeah.
required. But on the other hand, there's also can be a lot of camaraderie, friendship, and all those sorts of things that go along with it.
Absolutely. Robert, we always like to talk about safety here on the podcast. One of the things we like to focus on. Would you have any safety tips for soaring?
Well, as a matter of fact, yes. If I go back to my flying career, apart from the fact that I had an accident, and that teaches you a lot, managed to have a pretty reasonably good safety record, including managing some operations. I remember that years ago when I was managing that helicopter school, we were flying 10,000 hours, about 5,000 hours power, 5,000 hour helicopters out of an uncontrolled small airstrip without accidents. And my
Wow.
view on safety and those sorts of things is pretty much the idea of discipline. So, for example, in that operation, we were flying left-hand circuits for airplanes, landing on the bitumen, right-hand circuits for helicopters landing on the grass, non-towered airfield, and we managed a lot of busy operations safely by basically good discipline. Now, I look in the gliding fraternity, and I see variations in attitude. I am concerned that sometimes I think in gliding it can become very familiar because we've been doing it this way for a long, long time. Lose sight of the fact that safety can be improved. So, in that regard, at my current club, I've been working on a number of issues to try and increase our level of general safety here in Australia, and also in the States. Recently, there have been quite a few mid-airs. There was the 17 and the P-39, of course, that you all know about. You may have seen on the news a couple of helicopters crashed on the Gold Coast recently with some fatalities. There was a light sport aircraft flew near a Queensland gliding club and collided with the glider, and the glider pilot and the light aircraft pilot were killed. So there's been quite a number of notable collisions recently. So in recent months, I've been working with our club into trying to identify some of the hazards that can be reduced or mitigated. Because we've been a very small club with low level of operation, some of these things can go unnoticed. But as we build up our operations and have more gliders in the air at the time, there are things that we can do. And one of the things I'm working on at the moment is just changing our circuit operations to avoid conflicts with where the tug goes and where the gliders arrive and those sorts of things. So I'm conscious that there's a necessity to be aware of what the risks might be and also to do what you can to mitigate it. I'm afraid that familiarity sometimes just means, oh, yes, that's okay. And we've been doing this for a lot of years, so we haven't had any problems. I don't see it that way. The way I see it is that no matter how long you've been flying and what you've been doing, you've still got to be looking out for what can be done. So we are working on that down where we are. The other thing we don't have down here, we've been isolated from the mainstream and we don't have FLAM. Are you using FLAM, I imagine, in the States?
Yeah, quite a bit. Yeah.
Quite a bit, yes. In most clubs they do. But down here we've been sort of isolated. We're a small operation and my glider and other private gliders are FLAM equipped, but I'm just working on, at the moment, trying to get our club fleet equipped with which I might call a FLAM type of system. The actual FLAM units are quite expensive. And of course, there's other things that are going on as well. In Australia, the government is subsidising the use of what they call EC, electronic conspicuity devices, ADSB basically. I have an ADSB in-out unit in my glider now, so that the ADSB-equipped aircraft was to fly through the glider area, they'll see me. At the moment, I'm getting me to see them at the moment. It's a little bit more electronics required, but we're working on that. And the government in Australia is pursuing a program of subsidy to get as many aircraft equipped with these kind of devices. But unfortunately, these ADSB type conspicuity devices aren't compatible with FLAM in Australia. They are in Europe and maybe the United States, but not in Australia. They're operating on different frequencies. So that's a bit of an issue. So there's work to be done there in terms of electronics, in terms of how we can better make sure all aircraft can see all other aircraft. And it's not very clear at the moment, but we are working on the problem. The other thing is that I had a lot to do with safety one way or another. One of the jobs I had in my professional career was to do with GPS, and we were developing instrument approaches using GPS down below the terrain, down in the valleys, where a failure of the GPS or the aircraft or the operating system or the cruise would be disastrous. In other words, you're flying down amongst the hills. So in those cases, you have to look at the safety of the complete operation, not just the safety of, say, the GPS unit, but how the crews operate and all those sorts of things. So I've had a lot to do with safety in a practical sense. What I do see and worries me is that there's a lot of academic safety. That is, you'll see lots of papers and great deal and depth about analysis of safety and so forth. In my day, back in the long distance past, it came down to a thing called airmanship. And I'm rather keen to try to get out of the academic kind of safety and theory safety into more the practical stuff. And again, going back to what I said before, the discipline. You know, if you look at your operation and you're disciplined about how you operate every day, you have people doing the same things, everybody understanding what's going on. So I'm very much into what I might call the practical side of safety rather than the academic or theoretical side of safety.
Well, thank you for sharing that. There's some good advice there.
Well, I think, everybody's got to be thinking about it all the time.
Absolutely.
It's very easy to say, oh, yeah, we're safe. I used to deal with airlines, and I'd say, go along with my company, the American company I told you about, we go along and say, look, I've got a better system for you here. It's going to improve your safety. And the airline would say, well, we're safe. We haven't had a crash. You're only as safe as your next crash. But
Yeah.
it is very hard, certainly in the commercial world, to sell safety. You would think that it would be first thing, but no, it's not. No, we're safe. We haven't had a crash. And I think probably the same thing will apply in gliding. Yeah, we've been operating for 20 or 30 years and we haven't killed anybody recently, so we're safe. But they said
Right. Yeah.
you're only as safe as your next accident, which could be the next flight. So I really think you
Yep.
just have to be on the ball, looking at everything you do and saying, well, hang on, we've been doing that for a lot of years, but really we could do it another way and we could reduce our risk. That's the other thing. People don't seem to think about. If you look into safety as a science, there are things you can do. Firstly, remove the risk. If you can't remove the risk, you mitigate the risk. But, those sorts of things take a lot of education, a lot of persuasion, a lot of education. But anyway, we are working on that as best we can down here. And the last thing I want to see is in a situation where you've got to stand up in front of somebody and explain what you did or did not do to reduce the risk following an unfortunate accident. I would not like to be in that position.
No, absolutely not.
But it's been nice to talk to you. I mean, I did look through quite a few of your previous podcasts, and of course, the things that are interesting are people are doing sort of amazing things and so forth. We're at the other end of the spectrum. We're the people who introduce others to gliding and those sorts of things, and I guess we hope that people who join us will go on to share the same experience, encourage other people to join, continue the sport and so forth. But we're very much down at the grassroots ends. But you need that because that's the other thing. It's all very well to look at people who are doing 1,500 kilometre flights and high altitude stuff and whatever it might be, but it all starts at the grassroots where somebody turns up on the field and says, I'd like to try gliding. So I think, we can't lose sight of the fact that so many, everybody who's out there achieving things have got to start somewhere. And so we do our bit to introduce people to gliding and do what we can in the circumstances we find ourselves.
Well, Robert, thanks for sharing us what it's like down in Tasmania. Very interesting. And you guys keep doing what you're doing and send some people hopefully down your way so they can experience soaring.
Tell them they'll always be welcome. We look after them as best we can.
Well, thanks for joining us.
All right, Chuck, it was very nice to talk.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi everyone, Sergio from Soaring Master here. Many pilots have at least once in their lifetimes saved a soaring flight by circling a thermal generated by a fire on the ground or by an industrial stack. But some fail to center it due to its different dynamics from a normal thermal. Let's see why. The thermal itself is obviously generated by the heat of gases being released from its source. But since those gases are not simply composed by air or water vapor, but by particulate matter and smoke of different colors, they will change the dynamics of the rising air parcel. And understanding where the updraft is located in relation to the wind can make the difference between climbing away or losing even more height. The smoke column generated by the fire is a great indication of atmospheric activity, whether it's calm or active, and of wind's strength and direction. Usually this will rule the thermal direction. If the smoke is puffing and dissipating rapidly, this indicates a good lapse rate and the presence of turbulence. This will mark not only the presence of updrafts along the rising smoke trail, but also of another thermals in the vicinity. Turbulence makes centering smoke from forest fires, burning debris a lot harder because it will make the centering almost impossible and making you lose precious height with the downdrafts over that area. It won't rule out its use, but they must be carefully assessed. A uniform and well-defined smoke stream indicates that the atmospheric conditions are stable and the centering can be more easily performed. But whenever there's enough wind to tilt the smoke column, the updrafts generated by the hot gases will not be located in the smoke itself, but immediately above it. The smoke is composed by ash and particulate matter, so it's heavier. The air patch immediately above it is one that will be heated by the smoke and will rise at a sharper angle upwind. That's where to look for tunnels. Always have in mind the breathing problem that smoke represents, which can lead to intoxication and impact your ability to fly. Your cockpit, no matter whether its ventilation is closed or not, will be contaminated by those gases, so anytime exposure to it, it's dangerous. You can fight strong turbulence inside thermals as well, which can anticipate the stall speed and lead to spins when flying heavy, so no slow thermal inside it. The sailplane surfaces can also become contaminated with ash by thermal fires, and this will affect your sailplane performance afterwards, so you need to closely assess the advantage of circling a thermal generated by a fire or not, because you will be paying for the rest of the flight performance-wise. In my opinion, if you have other options at hand, choose them. Only leave fires as a last resort. I wish you all happy flying, guys. For more tips, follow me on Instagram at Soaring Master or check my website, soaringmaster.com.
If you would like to say hi and let us know where you are enjoying the podcast, we would love to hear from you. If you are a glider pilot and want to share your aviation journey, contact us at chuck@soaringthesky.com or send us a message on our website at soaringthesky.com and Chuck will get in touch with you. We hope you join us next time for another soaring adventure here on Soaring the Sky, a Glider Pilots podcast. Soaring the Sky is written and produced by Chuck Fulton. Original music for the podcast was written and produced by Kim Spangler. Graphic design for the podcast was created by Zachary Fulton. Voiceover work was done by Michelle Perez.